Welcome into the Fantasy Drafter, and I'm Cody Smith at Cody Smith TFDR on X. And as always, as we've said almost every other show, if you want access to this sheet, down in the description below, there is a link that links you to everything. You can see multiple tabs under here, more so than what I'm showing right now. This is the simplified view, so there's a lot more into the sheet. Again, if you want access to it, or if you just want to build this out and use it as your own rankings, adjust the rankings or adjust the numbers that you don't agree with my personal tanks and build that personal takes and build out your own rankings, you can certainly do that as well. Build out your own projections, not your ranks. Again, big difference there. But today we're going to continue, or I guess this is the first video actually of the NFC North series, and we're going to start it off with the Detroit Lions. We're skipping the Cleveland Browns because I just don't even know who their quarterback is, and it's completely impossible for me to project what the offense looks like if I don't even know who the quarterback is. I know I don't know what the rookies are going to do if it is one of them, but if it's a Joe Flacco offense or a Kenny Pickett offense or a rookie offense, it just changes too much for me to, I think, give that one out there as context or as advice right now. So I'm going to avoid it for now. We're just going to jump into going with only three teams from the AFC North, getting into the NFC North, and we're going to start off with a pretty good team here, I think, of the Detroit Lions, because we've had consistency here outside of the major factor of Ben Johnson leaving. However, I think if you're looking at just this team from the head coaching and the offensive coordinator view, I think a lot of people just look at Dan Campbell and think of him just as that meathead type of guy, but he does have an offensive background, being a tight ends coach originally from Texas A&M, hoorah, my alma mater, and then being under the Sean Payton offense, which is where this kind of offense has developed, and then Ben Johnson coming in as well and implementing his own things. Obviously a step back from what we think that Ben Johnson is as an offensive coordinator. We'll see what that looks like with the Chicago Bears in a couple of days in one of the later episodes that I drop on here. But I don't think we're going to see too much of a drop here for the Detroit Lions. I think they'll take a step back in regression, but not too much. We'll look at the offensive historicals now that we have John Morton, who's going to come in as the offensive coordinator under Dan Campbell for the 2025 season. But I think we can still use the three-year historicals for this team. You still have the same quarterback. You still have all the pass-catching weapons. You still have Gibbs and Montgomery. Everything should be pretty clear-cut here. I know they all haven't been there for a full 3 years, but I think the 3-year average will work for this team. And so we can get into that now. For our six big categories, 3-year average of total passing attempts being at 582, 505 rushes on the ground, 451 of those going to the running back, 112 RB targets, 348 wide receiver targets, and 110 tight end targets. If there's been any big discrepancies, we did drop down by about 55 passing attempts from 23 to 24. Rushing attempts to counteract that did go up by 34 from 500 to 534. RB targets went up just a little bit, but that's been a pretty consistent number around that 110, 115 number. 3-year average comes in at 112. Wide receiver targets did drop down. It's dropped down pretty significantly over the past 3 years from 402 in 2022 down to 333, down to 309. I bet that's probably due from the 402 to the 333 whenever the Sam Laporta effect happened on this offense, and they started using him as more so of like a wide receiver 2 almost, or a receiving option 2 for this team. So you see the drop down there. And then the tight end targets, yeah, we see the increase from 93 to 136 in those 2 years from 22 to 23. And then another drop down as Sam Laporta had kind of a regression year in 2024 down to 101. We can get into this offense now. We'll start it off at the top with Jared Goff. Again, the total number of passing attempts for the 3-year average has been at 582. This one, it's crazy how these things work out sometimes, and it's been happening. I know I've said it on a lot of episodes, but they just come out really similarly a lot of times whenever you have a good amount of historical data to do it. 583 attempts for Jared Goff, and then we'll start getting into his secondary stats to build out the rest of the line. Completion percentage landed in on 68.95% for Jared Goff, and the completion percentage for him on his career has been a 65.6%. However, last year was a career high for him at 72.4, jumping up from the 2023 season at 67.3. So if we middle those two a little bit, have a little bit of regression for this offense from a 72 down to a 69 almost number, nice. That's going to come in with 402 completions for the receiving options on the Detroit Lions. 4,653 yards is where these two numbers come out from, the yards per attempt and the yards per completion numbers. The yards per attempt number at 7.98. Jared Goff over the last 3 years on yards per attempt has been at a 7.6, 7.6, and jumped all the way up to 8.6 last year. So we bring that number back down closer to that 7.6 number at 7.98. Yards per completion was at 11.57 for my projections. And let's see if this loads. There we go. Yards per completion for the last 3 years of Jared Goff has been 11.6, 11.2, and 11.9. So probably about an 11.5 average. And 11.5 average has actually been his career average as well. So right at the career average in yards per completion for Jared Goff gives us that, again, 4,653 total passing yards. 34 touchdowns is going to come from the touchdown rate on the total number of attempts that we put him for. He jumped up to a 6.9% touchdown rate last year, passing for 37 total touchdowns. The years before that, he only threw for 29 touchdowns and 30 touchdowns on a 4.9 and a 5.0 touchdown throw rate for the total number of passing attempts. And that number is going to come down a little bit, probably middling those a little bit more. You could drop the touchdowns down closer to that 30 if you really wanted a full-scale regression for this team. But I think dropping him down here to a 34 is probably more in where I want this team to personally be, as I don't think they'll take as drastic of a step back as a lot of other people were saying, or a lot of other people are saying. And then the 12 interceptions. We don't need to do too much with his rushing. We know that he's a pocket passing quarterback. 31 total rushes on the year, a 1.48 average. If we are looking at his rushing profile, though, yards per attempt last year, he was at a 1.6. The year before that, 0.7, 2.0 yards per attempt on the ground for his career average. So we're going to get 46 yards and 1 touchdown. Then we can start getting into the really fun pieces of this offense. Actually, before we do, just want to highlight that Jared Goff did come out as my quarterback 9 overall in positional ranks for the quarterback position. And it's a very good season. I know he's been I think he's been top 12 in most formats for the last couple of years, and just a significantly undervalued quarterback, in my opinion. As long as they are this high-paced offense, they do have the most plays run of any team that I currently have statted out in terms of just rushing attempts and passing attempts. 1,111, 4 ones there for the Detroit Lions. So they're a very high-powered offense. I don't think that's going to take a drastic step back. I think this is the way they want to operate. It could take a little bit more of a step back than I'm projecting here, but I think that this is about right where I want to be. Let's get into Jahmyr Gibbs, though, and get into these running backs of David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, trying to combine the two. That'd be an insane running back if you could combine the two just into one. But for the last 2 years for Jahmyr Gibbs, he bumped his total number of rushing attempts up from 182 to 250 over 17 games last year. But this was with a little bit of David Montgomery missing some time. I dropped that number from the 250 with David Montgomery missing the time down to 243. Again, before we get into the total of this, 485 RB rushes for the Detroit Lions. Last year, they were at 478. So not too much of a drastic increase from the year previous to the next year. We do have just the total number of plays going up, though, because we have the total number of attempts and the total number of rushes going up. They took a step back in that last year from the 2023 season, so I think that's going to be a little bit more closer to 2023. Jahmyr Gibbs, though, with the 243 rushing attempts, is going to be coming in. Let's then look at his yards per attempt over the last 2 years, first 2 years in the league, 5.2 and 5.6, an incredibly efficient rusher with this Detroit Lions offensive line and offensive scheme in general. I have that coming in at a 5.34, closer to the first year than the second year. Again, just a little bit of aggression that we're going to see from a lot of these players on this team. Gives him the 1,298 yards and 11 touchdowns. Last year for Jahmyr Gibbs, he put up 16 total touchdowns. Another one of the rushing running backs who put up a tied for the career high, or for the league high, of rushing touchdowns last year with Jahmyr Gibbs at 16, I believe, with James Cook, and I'm forgetting the other one off the top of my head, but there is another one who tied. Derrick Henry, I believe, was the other one who tied for 16 total rushing touchdowns, as we just did the previous video on him a couple days ago. So that's going to give him that 1,298 yards, 11 touchdowns. We can then go into the receiving profile for Jahmyr Gibbs, where he's had 71 and 63 targets the last 2 years. Again, there's a lot more that went into this than what I'm currently doing on the surface of like trying to parse out the segments where Jahmyr Gibbs was the starter or was the only running back in the system comparatively to like when they were both together, and then just kind of merging those two numbers together. So I'm not just taking the total number of attempts over the course of the season. I'm trying to kind of merge when they were both in the offense together. As we're projecting them out for 17 games, they have to coexist in this offense, right? So the 66 total passing attempts, that's going to be in between the numbers of last year and his first year, 71 and 63 total targets. So we're going to come in at that 66 number. Catch rate at 75.76%. Catch rate over his career over the last 2 years has been at 73 and 82%. That number comes in between those two numbers at 75.76 for 50 catches, 7.34 yards per reception. Yards per reception numbers has been at 6.1 and jumped all the way up to almost 10 at 9.9 in 2024. That number drops back down to 7.34 for Jahmyr Gibbs and 3 total touchdowns through the air. For David Montgomery, 225 rushing attempts on the ground, just an insane volume of rushing attempts and total just number of plays that this offense, I believe, can put up in 2025. 225 total attempts for David Montgomery as well. Last couple of years for him, he had 185, but only in 14 games last year, 219 in 14 games in 23, and 201 in 16 games in 2022. Maybe a little bit of a concern that he can't complete a full 17-game pace. Maybe you want to drop this number down. I'm still going to put him at 17 here, but I think you could make the argument that he could be dropped down to like maybe a 14, 15, 16-game pace, but I don't think it's meaningful enough over the course of a 17-game sample size to really put it in here yet. So I'm just going to leave him at the 17 games, 225 total rushing attempts, 4.03 yards per attempt. If we're looking at that number the last 2 years that he's been in the Detroit Lions system, I'm not really going to look into any of the Chicago Bears numbers, but he's been at a 4.6 and a 4.2 within this offense. I've dropping down just a little bit more. 1 year older, Jahmyr Gibbs gets some more of the actual rushing down work. Maybe David Montgomery's just getting a little bit more of like goal line, short yardage, that type of thing. Drop it down a little bit more to 4.03, gives him the 907 yards and 10 rushing touchdowns, 22 total rushing touchdowns on the ground for this team. Just a ridiculously efficient offense. Last year, he put up 12 touchdowns. His previous year with the Detroit Lions, he put up 13 touchdowns. So it's even taking a step back in regression from both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery on the ground, and we're still getting to these crazy numbers. A very, very good offense that I don't think is going to take as drastic of a step back as some people might think. 39 total targets through the air. Last year, or the last 2 years with the Detroit Lions, he's been at 24 and 38 targets. Again, not in a 17-game pace, so I bumped that number up just a little bit to 39 total targets. The catch rate at 79.49. That catch rate for the last 2 years has been at 66. Wow, that's jumped up incredibly high. He caught 36 of 38 targets last year. 38 targets, 36 receptions for David Montgomery. He was a very, very slept on pass catcher last year. Honestly, he was better, I think, in most categories than Jahmyr Gibbs as a pass catcher last year. So interested to see if they do give him a little bit more work. I still think that Jahmyr Gibbs will handle the majority of it. He has that explosive big play ability, but David Montgomery definitely not a slouch in that area either. It gives him the 31 total receptions. And then looking at the yards per reception, I have him at 8.65. Again, this is where just by the numbers, he's been a more efficient running back in that passing category. 7.3 yards per reception and a 9.5 yards per reception. Although I think we just said that Jahmyr Gibbs bumped up to 9.9. We dropped him down a little bit lower, but his career average coming in at 8.2. I have it just a little bit above the career average at 8.65, 268 total yards in the air, and 1 total touchdown. Let's take a break here, and we'll get back to it on the other side. All right, break time is over, and then we can get into the wide receivers. The big two are really the only ones that we're going to focus on here. We can talk a little bit about Tim Patrick and Isaac Tesla, their third-round pick, or they traded for third-round pick of Isaac Tesla to potentially be their wide receiver 3 for this team. A definite reach for everybody, at least in the scouting, fantasy football, even I think in NFL circles committee, to have Isaac Tesla that high. I still love myself some Tim Patrick, so I have those two kind of splitting. I guess that's about all we really need to talk about them, though. But the Amon-Ra St. Brown at the top, I do think he's being highly disrespected, especially in fantasy right now, for what he has done over the course of his career. I have him coming in here at 151 targets over 17 games. I'll just go through his 4-year career here. 119 targets, 146, 164, and 141 last year, all playing between 17 and 16 games during those seasons. So it comes out here for 151 targets for Amon-Ra St. Brown. 76.82 catch percentage, a ridiculous number, not like Khalil Shakir, ridiculous numbers, but a career average for Amon-Ra at 75.4. So we have that number just a little bit above the career average, giving him 116 total receptions for 11.68 yards per reception. Those 4 years for Amon-Ra in this offense, yards per reception is 10, 1, 11, 12, 7, and 11. Career average at 11.3. So we come in just again a little bit above the career average, 76 or 1,355 total yards on that, and 11 touchdowns. Touchdowns for Amon-Ra last year was at 12. The year before was at 10. So we middle those two numbers. We come in at 11 total touchdowns. We bring it back down a little bit, as Jared Goff probably isn't expected to throw as many touchdowns. We bring it back down just a little bit. Then we can get from Amon-Ra into Jameson Williams. And I have been a JMO hater for a long time, but I'm finally probably willing to accept that I should have him a lot higher in my rankings than I ever probably had him before, and probably need to pick myself up a couple of shares. So I have him coming in with 105 total targets on this offense. Again, if we're looking back at the wide receiver targets, the 3-year average has been 348 targets to the wide receiver. I have that lower at 337. Last year, the number did dip down, though, to 309. So I have more targets coming to the wide receiver for this team. The 105 targets for Jameson Williams, we can then look at his catch rate. I had that number coming in at 61.90 for JMO. First 3 years in the league. Catch percentage dismal in that rookie year where he was only playing 6 games, only had 9. He had 9 targets and 1 catch. This is probably why I was really, really low on JMO. Whenever you play 6 games, 9 targets, 1 catch, immediately I'm probably just writing you off. An 11.1 catch rate in his rookie year jumps all the way up to 57.1 in his second year. Still not great, but then takes another step up in the third year. And this is where we finally see JMO becoming a wide receiver 2 for the league. Jumps all the way up to 63.7%. So I have that number now dropping a little bit below that 63 because you've shown me 2 years before that you really were struggling very mightily in this offense. You could see another rise in projection if you want to project JMO for bigger and better things in his 4th year as he keeps growing in the league. I can't fault you for it. I'm just going to have a little bit of a regression step back for him at 61.90%. Gives him 65 catches on the year, 15.20 yards per completion in the air. Those numbers have been one catch, though, in 2022 was 41 yards. So he has a 41 yards per reception number. We'll negate that one because that's obviously outlier territory. 14.8, though, in his second year and 17.3 yards per reception in 2024. We bring that number back down to 15.2, gives us 988 yards through the air and 6 touchdowns. Last year, he put up 7 touchdowns. Again, if the offense is going to have less passing attempts for touchdowns, we bring the number down for JMO as well from 7 to 6. And that's going to give us a Jameson Williams finish at 36 overall. And then as we're here, we can also mention that Amon-Ra did come out as wide receiver 4 for me with this stat line. Again, one of the most disrespected players right now. I'm honestly going to go probably to my leagues right as soon as I finish this video and see if I can go out and acquire some Amon-Ra St. Brown, because I do think he's being highly, highly slept on right now for the likes of guys that have a little bit more youth and upside, I guess, left to them, like a Malik Neighbors or a Brian Thomas Jr. That we've talked about and then will talk about in future episodes. To round out the wide receivers, the Tim Patrick and Isaac TeSlaa debate. I do think if Isaac TeSlaa steps into the role, he really could assume the wide receiver 3 role for this team, but I wasn't very high on him. This is just personal bias prospect scouting, honestly, at this point. So I do have him with what they invested into him becoming a part of the offense, but I do think they split either at the beginning, it's Tim Patrick, and then it's Isaac TeSlaa, or they go back and forth through the year, and neither one of them can really gain full control of the wide receiver 3 slot. So I have them pretty much splitting the work here. 37 targets, 25 catches, 307 yards, and 1 touchdown for Tim Patrick. 27, 15, 249, and 2 for Isaac TeSlaa. That'll get us to the tight end position where we do have Sam Laporta to round this one out. Brock Wright and Shane Zylstra, just throwaways in the grand scheme of things. But Sam Laporta coming in as my tight end 4, another guy who's taken a drastic step back from his down year in his second year in the league. We can get into those target numbers. He dropped from 120 targets in his rookie year to 83 targets in his second year. I have that number kind of middling itself back out at 102 targets for this offense. Again, if we're increasing the number of passing attempts for this team, but decreasing the number of total touchdowns, I think some of those offensive passing attempts can go back into Sam Laporta. So I have him sitting here, middling those 2 numbers at 102. 70.59% on the catch rate. The last 2 years, he's been at 70.1 and 72.3. So this is probably a little bit low, but if we add, let's even just see. If we add 1 in here, No, I can't do it here because those are linked to a different sheet. So that's a failed attempt. But those numbers would change by probably a full percentage point if I was to change one number either way or the other. So 72 completions on this, you could probably get them up a little bit higher, maybe 73, 74, but grand scheme of things doesn't really matter here. 72 total catches, though, at an 11.96 yards per reception. Yards per reception numbers, he was really good last year at a 12.1, jumping that number up from a 10.3 in his rookie year. So I have it coming back down just a little bit, right under 12 at 11.96 and 8 touchdowns. I think this is where Sam Laporta took a step back. Yeah, he dropped from 10 total touchdowns in his rookie year to 7 total touchdowns in his second year. I have it bumping up 1 to 8 total touchdowns, and then Brock Wright also picking up 1. This is an offense that really loves to use a bunch of like trick plays and stuff. So these numbers, even though they're right here right now, like you could probably take about a reception or so off of each one of these guys because they have like a safety, 3 linemen, and a special teamer that'll catch passes potentially for touchdowns as well. Dan Campbell loves to run those trick plays and pull them out of the bag, especially on those 4th down red zone targets. So you could take off some here just because they're not going to be listed. I can't really project them for that. I guess I could just make this number not 34 to match up with the 34 for the quarterback, but it's one of those one-offs that I'm not really going to pay too much attention for the counting stats for this type of an episode. But now we will get to the wrap up for them. 583 total attempts for 402 completions, 4,653 yards, 34 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions, 528 total rushes on the ground, 2,386 yards on rushing attempts for 22 touchdowns. 569 targets is a little bit less than that total number of attempts number at 583. And that will result in 1,111 plays, leading the league, and then with the 56 total touchdowns. Still a very good offense, in my opinion. Took a little bit of a step back, I believe, in total numbers from 2024 to 2025, but I don't think it's going to be that drastic. I don't really know much about the John Morton character, but I do trust Dan Campbell, and I trust Jared Goff and this offense for what it's been to not take too much of a step back. So if you like this one, you can leave a like below. If you don't do it. But if you want to subscribe, you can also do that. Apparently you can click a bell thing. I don't know exactly what that is, but we'll be back tomorrow with another episode, and I hope you tap into that one, another NFC North team. So I will see you then. Thanks.